Now, because of the way the Scottish elections work, as we were discussing, where voters have got 2 votes, it's possible that Alba does more damage to the Greens or even the Conservatives and Labour than the SNP. Now, the Conservatives are so worried about this. Their leader in Scotland, Douglas Ross, yesterday called for fellow Unionist parties to put aside their differences and form an alliance to stop a second independence referendum. Douglas Ross joins us now. Firstly, just your reaction to the Kenny McCaskill interview. He says this is all about helping the SNP, building a supermajority. Do you think it will work that way?
Well, that's what it's all about for the SNP and Nationalists. I listened to every word from the Alba Party representative, Kenny McCaskill, there, and not once did he mention COVID recovery or rebuilding after this pandemic.
Well, he talked a lot about austerity, didn't he, to be fair?
Well, he didn't speak about recovery after this pandemic and how we get Scotland back up and running after the last 12 months, because for Nationalists, it's all about another independence referendum. And that's what I was saying to fellow Unionist leaders here in Scotland yesterday. We can't help the recovery, we can't rebuild Scotland when all the narrative from the Scottish Government, from the SNP and from the Alba Party is going to be focused on another independence referendum. So we've got to work together to stop them.
I'm interested in this. You say you want to work together with other pro-unionist parties. You've written to the Labour and the Lib Dem leaders. Have they replied yet?
Yes, sadly, they both turned down that offer, but the offer remains. We've got to look at how we approach this new threat. As you said in your introduction there, this could split the SNP vote, but they don't get many MSPs off the regional list, so it's more likely to do more harm to the Unionist party. So we've got to understand that threat, not ignore it and assume that we can continue as normal. We've got to put our party politics to one side in this important effective referendum, because the Nationalists want this election to be about another independence referendum to separate Scotland from the rest of the UK.
I'm just trying to work out what this offer actually means. You want to work together with other pro-unionist parties. I mean, are you actually saying that you might go into government, a coalition government, if you like, with Labour?
Well, that's one of the pledges, that we would sign up to a Unionist manifesto if the numbers work after the election, to work together to get rid of the Nationalists.
So you would go into government with Labour?
I'm saying that's what we need to get round the table and discuss, because after the last 14 years in Scotland, where the SNP have been in charge, we've not had the focus on the economy, on protecting jobs, on education, on supporting the NHS. We've had a focus on independence. That's the SNP's priority and the Nationalist priority. So we've got to look at how we can build up as big a coalition as possible to stop that. And the speed at which the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats refused that offer yesterday tells me that we've got to just unite behind the strongest opposition to the SNP then, and that's the Scottish Conservatives.
I'm a bit confused, because you say that the problem with the SNP and the Alba Party is that they want to make this election all about independence rather than other issues. But surely by talking about and calling for a pro-union alliance, that is also making the election all about independence, isn't it?
Well, that's responding to the threat that has now emerged, that the Alba Party have set up to work with the Scottish National Party to get a supermajority for independence. That means there will not be an opportunity to discuss our recovery, not be an opportunity for the Scottish Parliament to be laser focused on rebuilding after COVID, because the Nationalists will drag us back to the same old divisive, destructive arguments of the past.
Isn't the truth that actually making this election all about independence benefits the Scottish Conservatives, doesn't it? You want to position yourself as the most strongly pro-union party.
We are the strongest pro-union party in Scotland. We've shown that at the last election 5 years ago. We stopped the SNP getting a majority. The Scottish Labour Party have...
So you want it to be about independence, don't you?
No, I want it to be about education in Scotland. I want it to be about protecting jobs in Scotland. I want it to be about our recovery from this pandemic. As you heard from Kenny McCaskill, not a single word about recovery or rebuilding from the Alba Party. For Nationalists, it's all about independence.
So, and you think you can achieve all of those domestic objectives most easily in coalition with Labour?
Well, we've got to work with all parties who want to stop the Nationalists. They've been in power for a decade and a half, and look at what they've done in Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon said judge her on her number one priority, which would be education. But of course, everyone can see her number one priority has always been another independence referendum and separating Scotland from the rest of the UK. We've got to wake up to this threat. We cannot continue to bury our heads in the sand like the Scottish Labour Party want to do. The threat is real. It's in front of us now. Let's brace that threat and work together to stop the Nationalists. Otherwise, Scottish politics will again be dominated by the independence debate.
If the next Scottish Parliament contains a majority, even a supermajority for independence, Will Boris Johnson just refuse to grant a referendum in any circumstances?
Well, sadly, that doesn't even matter to the Nationalists because they've said they'll go ahead with a wildcat illegal referendum anyway. So no matter what happens, if you vote for a nationalist party, be it Nicola Sturgeon's Nationalists or Alex Salmond's Nationalists, their priority will be another referendum, whether it's a legal referendum or an illegal wildcat referendum. They will not be focused on recovery. They cannot be focused on rebuilding Scotland when they're trying to rip us out of the United Kingdom.
The question I asked wasn't about what the SNP will do, though. It's about what the Conservatives will do, since you are, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives. If there is a majority for independence in the next Scottish Parliament, will Boris Johnson refuse to grant a referendum?
But that's the problem, Sophie. That's exactly the point I'm making. It doesn't matter if the Prime Minister...
No, but will he or not, though?
If the Prime Minister...
Other people can decide whether it matters. People want to know what it's going to do.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister has been clear he does not want another independence referendum in Scotland. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We need to focus on our recovery and rebuilding. But the Nationalists will ignore that. The Nationalists have already said, and Nicola Sturgeon set up a commission within the SNP with an 11-point plan to have another independence referendum, even if it's an illegal wildcat referendum without the Section 30 order from the UK government.
We know that Boris Johnson doesn't want another referendum, but will he refuse to grant another referendum in all circumstances?
The Prime Minister has been clear he's not going to grant the powers for another independence referendum because he thinks it's absolutely wrong for Scotland right now to be dragged back into that destructive arguments of the past, to go through all the pain and suffering that we had in Scotland through that last debate when we should be focused on recovery and rebuilding. But the Nationalists are going to ignore that and they're going to say we'll have a referendum anyway, and that will take Scotland backwards rather than focusing on our recovery and rebuilding from this pandemic.
Would it be democratic, though, for Boris Johnson to refuse to grant a referendum if there is a majority in favour of independence parties?
Well, it wouldn't be democratic for the Nationalists to go ahead with a wildcat legal referendum, but they're going to do it anyway. And this is the whole point. This is why I'm asking people to unite behind the strongest party to stop the SNP and to stop the Nationalists. I'd like to do it with the Scottish Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, but if they're not up for that fight, if they can't see the threat in front of us right now, then people have to see there is a party that's willing to challenge the SNP, willing to stand up to the Nationalist threat that we are facing here in Scotland, and that's the Scottish Conservatives. We stopped them 5 years ago, we can do it again, but the threat is very real. It's in front of us now. We've got a short time to stop them, and everyone has to back the strongest party to stop the Nationalists, and that's the Scottish Conservatives.
OK, thank you very much for being on the programme, Douglas Ross there. Thank you.